Child smugglers exploit the loopholes, and they gain illegal entry into the United States, putting countless children in danger.
Donald Trump pushes back at outrage over his hardline stance on immigration, his policy of separating children from their parents when crossing the U.S. border illegally has triggered protests across the country. I'm Andrew Nichols. You're watching CBC News Network. Also this hour, Donald Trump's new immigration policy spilled over into debate in the House of Commons today.
It's about lives, real people, real children being subjected to torture.
The NDP is demanding action by Ottawa against Trump's border policy. They're calling on the Prime Minister to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States.
A reasonable NAFTA deal, or deal doesn't have to be called NAFTA. We can do one-on-one with Mexico, one-on-one with Canada.
Trump also took aim at Canada over trade. The U.S. president renewed his attacks on NAFTA renegotiations and Canada's price controls on dairy. The personal stories, the images, and the voices of crying children are fueling outrage over Donald Trump's new U.S. border policy. Even some prominent Republicans are speaking out about the separation of migrant children and their parents. And now there are public protests.
I will not be silent while children are caged, while children are ripped out of the hands of their mothers.
This vigil in Washington was organized by a group of multi-faith women. They gathered this morning outside the headquarters of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Similar events were planned in other cities, but despite the outcry, Trump appears to be digging in his heels, upping his anti-migrant rhetoric in a speech today.
We want security on the border. We don't want people coming in. We want them to come in through a legal process like everybody else that's waiting to come in to our country. You'll have killings, you'll have murders, you'll have this, you'll have that, you'll have crime. You'll have crime. And remember, these countries that we give tremendous foreign aid to in many cases, they send these people up, and they're not sending their finest. Does that sound familiar? Remember I made that speech and I was badly criticized? Oh, what's so terrible, what he said. Turned out I was 100% right. That's why I got elected.
Later today, the president heads to Capitol Hill to discuss immigration with Republican lawmakers. And Stephen D'Souza joins us now from Washington with more. So, Stephen, let's start with the president's position on all of this. What is he hoping for?
Well, he says that there needs to be a change in the laws and that it's up to the Democrats to come to the table and create that change. And what we saw again today was a president emboldened, feeling confident as he did on Friday when he came to the lawn of the White House to speak with reporters. And you saw him echoing back to that key issue, the issue of immigration, that was one of the issues that helped get him elected. And this was a president who was speaking to a business crowd today at lunchtime, but instead spent about 30 minutes discussing this immigration bill. And for all of those images that people are seeing at the border of children being separated, the president, on the other hand, sees something very different. You heard him talk about smugglers there. He's talking about crime coming in to the border, of smugglers taking advantage of the loopholes that he says were created by the Democrats. And so he's painting a very dark picture of the people coming to the border and says that without Democrats, they can't solve this issue, ignoring the fact that this is in fact a Trump administration policy that came into effect in April and that the president could pick up the phone at any time and reverse this. And so he went on to put the blame on Democrats and called for them to help fix this problem. Here's more of what the president had to say earlier.
We need Democrat support. They don't want to give it because Democrats love open borders. Let the whole world come in. Let the whole world, MS-13 gang members from all over the place, come on in. We have open borders. And they view that, possibly intelligently, except that it's destroying our country. They view that as potential voters. Someday, they're going to vote for Democrats.
Trump put this as a very binary choice between having open borders or prosecuting criminals, which is what the policy is doing right now in terms of treating migrants who come to the border illegally. Trump also saying that really when it comes down to it, there needs to be a third option and that Congress needs to step up, and that's part of what he'll be seeking when he comes here to the U.S. Capitol later this afternoon, Andrew.
So, Stephen, is there any reason to believe this pressure will change Trump's position?
Well, it's interesting because Trump is coming to the U.S. Capitol here, and he's going to hear it not just from Democrats who have been saying that this needs to end, but also from House Republicans themselves who are feeling the pressure. They're seeing those same pictures that everyone in the public is seeing, and they're hearing it from constituents. And so House Republicans are trying to work up some sort of legislative fix to keep parents and their children together. In fact, Mitch McConnell, who's on the Senate side, says that they are willing to work together, that everyone on his side supports keeping families together with their children, and that they're going to work on some sort of legislation to do that. Ted Cruz as well has introduced one of many different motions that are before the House and Senate to try to fix this issue. Here's what Ted Cruz had to say.
I believe we can do two things at once. We can detain those who are here illegally and enforce the law, and we can simultaneously keep families together. To the extent the administration can implement this policy and keep families together, it should do so. But Congress can step in and pass this week. I'm urging Congress, we can fix this problem. We can fix this, and I've been speaking with both Republicans and Democrats. We can come together. We ought to all be united and say, of course, kids should be with their parents.
The challenge is that the legislation proposed by Ted Cruz, as well as what Mitch McConnell is talking about, is only a very narrow piece of legislation which would only address the children being separated from their families. And we heard from the White House yesterday at the press briefing that that's not what they want. The president wants very broad legislation tackling a number of issues, including funding for the wall, cuts to legal immigration, the visa policy, the visa program. But the challenge is that these are issues that Republicans and Congress has been trying to solve for decades, and here they are facing mounting pressure from this very public campaign involving children being separated at the border, not being able to come up with a solution right away. And the other issues that Democrats have been left out of the process that Republicans have been working on. So you have Republicans who can't agree on immigration legislation, meeting with the president who wants something done on a very broad basis. And so we see this problem that's been really a challenge for decades here in Washington, having the president showing up to Capitol Hill later this afternoon saying that he wants a solution. He wants it right away.
All right, Stephen, thank you. That is the CBC's Stephen D'Souza live in Washington. Mexico's foreign minister is reacting to the controversial U.S. border policy. Luis Videgaray urged Trump to end the policy immediately. He says he has spoken with the UN Secretary General about the issue, and the Mexican foreign minister says his country believes migrant children detained in the U.S. should be directly repatriated to their home countries. We've seen some images from inside the detention centers where children are being held, and now we're hearing their voices and their desperate pleas. And Steve Niles is here with the details of a secret audio recording from one of those facilities. So, Steve, tell us what's on those tapes.
Andrew, everything that we have seen and heard out of these facilities so far is what the U.S. government agencies have allowed us to see, either as part of a guided tour for the media or footage that was released to the media to show what it's like inside. What we can now share with you, though, is neither of these. It was obtained by the not-for-profit investigative journalism outfit. It's called ProPublica, and it said it obtained the audio last year, and it was an incredibly difficult piece of audio to share with people. I'll describe some of it we can. It's very difficult to hear. It is the sounds of children crying, calling for their mothers and fathers in Spanish. These children are said to be from El Salvador. You'll also hear at one point a border guard making a sarcastic joke. You'll hear this in a second, making light of what he would be hearing and seeing. So without further ado, here is that clip.
Bueno, aquí tenemos una orquesta. Faltaba el maestro.
Now, that was just a small sample of what was provided to ProPublica by this individual whose identity they are protecting. The border guard that was making a joke about having an orchestra there, he went on to continue that line, adding the only thing that's missing at that point is the conductor. Andrew?
And so what do we know about the kids in this recording?
According to ProPublica, they said that the children who are in this facility, ranging between ages of 4 and 10 years old, had likely only been there for less than 24 hours at that point. So they say that the distress about being separated from their families was still very raw. At one point, there's a child who actually begs to speak to her aunt, one of the older children there. She says that she knows her phone number, that her mother has said her aunt will be coming for her. Now, on the recording, we didn't play this part for obvious reasons, but the girl has memorized her aunt's phone number and she speaks it out loud. So ProPublica contacted that aunt. She confirmed that, yes, that is in fact her niece that is in that facility, a 9-year-old girl. The problem, though, for that aunt, though, is that she's incapable of going to get her because that aunt and her own daughter are seeking asylum in the United States. The aunt describing that, saying that it was the hardest moment of her life having to hear from there. She said, quote, "She's crying and begging me to go get her. I promise I'll behave," the little girl said, "but please get me out of here. I am all alone." Andrew?
All right, Steve, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, the crisis at the U.S. border is spilling over into Canadian politics. For a second day in a row, the opposition NDP is calling for an end to the Safe Third Country Agreement. It's a pact between Canada and the U.S. to deal with refugees, and it is based on the understanding that the two countries treat migrants in similar ways. The CBC's Karina Roman is in Ottawa. She joins me now live. So, Karina, tell us more about what the opposition is saying about this agreement.
Well, essentially, they're saying that you cannot see the U.S. with everything that's going on as a safe country, because with our agreement that we have with the U.S., if someone comes via the U.S. to a Canadian official border crossing, Canada can turn that person back and say, U.S. is a safe country, you went there first, that's where you should make your claim. And the opposition is now saying, and they're not alone, that we can't say that the U.S. is a safe country anymore because of the separation of the children from their family, and because they're now detaining everybody who comes illegally into the U.S. So it's sort of the change in how they're detaining people and the fact that they're detaining everyone. And that this breaks all kinds of signatory conventions that the U.S. has signed on to, that, if they're not going to treat people according to those conventions, that they're breaking the law and not upholding this agreement we have with them. Here's a little bit of the exchange that happened in question period today.
Even former Conservative Minister Chris Alexander is calling for the suspension of the Safe Third Country Agreement. Trump is taking migrant children hostage and putting them in cages to advance his political agenda. Amnesty International calls it, quote, nothing short of torture. Will the Prime Minister state the obvious, that the United States is no longer a safe country for migrant children?
I think all Canadians are troubled by the images that are emerging from the United States. The lives of these children are very, very precious, and we continue to monitor any changes to the domestic asylum system in the United States, as we are required to do so by the Immigration, Refugee and Protection Act.
You have not just the opposition calling for this. You have, former Canadian ambassador to the UN, Alan Rock. You have former Liberal Foreign Affairs Minister Lloyd Axworthy calling for a suspension of this agreement. You have many lawyers saying that there's no longer, this is not, the agreement to continue and that it should be suspended. So the NDP is not alone in calling for this.
Yeah, and then Jenny Kwan brought up former Immigration Minister Chris Alexander of the Conservatives. So, what is going on here, Karina? Because we've heard some emotion from some cabinet ministers on this troubling images or troubling situation at the border. But what seems to be holding the government back from taking any more action on this and potentially suspending that third country agreement?
They're extremely measured in their response, which is baffling many because it just seems like such a departure for this government on this kind of issue. But we do have to consider that we have a major trade dispute right now with the U.S. We just had the major debacle of the G7 with Donald Trump, very critical of our Prime Minister. You have the fact that there might be consequences to suspending the agreement for Canada, in that you might have more people coming to Canada then, because they can come via the U.S. on that. So there is all that to consider, but it is definitely a marked departure from, the tweet, a year and a half ago that Trudeau sent out after Donald Trump brought in the travel ban, saying we welcome people, diversity is our strength. He wasn't afraid to speak up then, but right now they're being very measured in their response.
It is fascinating to watch this debate and the way it's resonating in this country as well. Karina, thank you. The CBC's Karina Roman in Ottawa. So in his speech today, Donald Trump also launched into another tirade against NAFTA. Once again, he said Canada is treating the U.S. unfairly.
Canada, they like to talk. They're our great neighbor. They fought World War II with us. We appreciate it. They fought World War I with us, and we appreciate it, but we're protecting each other. We can no longer be the stupid country. We want to be the smart country. So hopefully, we'll be able to work it out with Canada. We have very good relationships with Canada. We have for a long time, and hopefully that'll work out. But Canada's not going to take advantage of the United States any longer.
Donald Trump went on to say that Canada charges such high tariffs on common goods, like shoes, that Canadians have to smuggle them across the border. And Jeannie Lee is here with more on that. So we're trying to understand exactly what he means by all of this. It was unusual to hear him talk about Canadians smuggling shoes across the border, but tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's really hard to say what he meant exactly, but we do know the context in which he's saying all of this. He obviously is sticking to his message that, Canada and Mexico are sticking it to the U.S. when it comes to free trade, that somehow the U.S. is being treated what he calls horribly. And that's because, and he points to the trade gap that the U.S. has with Mexico as proof of that, and the sometimes small trade gap that the U.S. has with Canada. Today, he seemed to be talking about trade on a very small scale, though, because as far as we can tell, this is about cross-border shopping, when Canadians go across the border to do some shopping, either for the day or for a couple of days, or even when they're away on vacation and they're allowed to bring in some goods for free that are duty exempt. So here's what Donald Trump had to say, first of all.
There was a story 2 days ago in a major newspaper talking about people living in Canada coming into the United States and smuggling things back into Canada because the tariffs are so massive. The tariffs to get common items back into Canada are so high that they have to smuggle them in. They buy shoes and they wear them. They scuff them up. They make them sound old or look old. No, we're treated horribly.
So, how many people actually do that? Well, there will be some that, don't want to pay taxes and duties when they come back home, when they cross the border, and they might put on extra clothes. We hear about that anecdotally, sure. But as a proportion of the entire trade that we do with the U.S., I'm not sure that that's such a huge amount. Besides, lately, cross-border shopping has been coming down. It's been reduced because gas is expensive, the dollar is low, the bargains aren't what they used to be, and there is the risk of also declaring that you have nothing and then being found out that you do have goods. So I'm not sure how widespread this practice is.
And also, Canadians going to the U.S. and buying shoes or whatever is good for the U.S. economy.
The U.S. sells more shoes.
The U.S. sells more shoes for cross-border shopping. Anyway, Trump has threatened to slap tariffs on cars and car parts from Canada, and we have a new estimate of the impact on the economy of that.
And that's from TD Bank. The senior economist there, Brian DiPrato, has based this on what the White House could impose on car parts, 10%, and 25% tariff on assembled cars. And he figures it'll mean 160,000 jobs scrubbed from the Canadian economy, with these other effects as well. Some of the predicted effects: 1 in 10 manufacturing jobs would vanish, half of those in Ontario, because that is a major cog in the Ontario economy. The loonie could fall to 64 cents within 18 months because of reduced growth, and there would be lost investment that would never be made up, because there will be companies that decide, because of high tariffs on manufactured parts and on car parts and assembled cars, that they're not going to set up shop in Canada, and that is a wound that may not fully heal. That's what's called the scarring effect, by the way.
Yeah, that could be very damaging to the Canadian economy. Trump also made fresh threats against China. That shook up markets overnight. Yes. How are they doing now?
It's been a busy night for Donald Trump and a busy day. And
I, as a mother, would do anything in my power to protect my child. And so I see it as my moral responsibility to be able to stand up for those who can't speak for themselves.
Outrage is growing over Donald Trump's hardline stance on immigration. His policy of separating children from their parents when crossing the U.S. border illegally has triggered demonstrations across the country. Trump is meeting today with Republican lawmakers about immigration changes. The list of celebrities denouncing the U.S. border policy is growing, and they are making their strong opinions known on social media. And Yelena Adzik has been tracking the developments. So, Yelena, often celebrities are offside with Donald Trump and many of his policies. Give us a sample of what people are saying.
That is true, but in this particular case, there's an interesting confluence that's happening here because some of these celebrities happen to be with Fox, or somehow their show or movie is affiliated with Fox, not news per se, but still under the umbrella of, and they're now having the struggle with what they believe and who they work for and how that particular company, Fox News, is representing the news of the day. Okay, so let's get right into it, first of all, with John Legend and Chrissy Teigen. Now, this is a couple that, of course, doesn't have to do with Fox per se, but these two have been very involved with this issue for a long time now. As you know, even in 2016, John Legend played a special concert outside a detention center, and the two of them have been very outspoken. Recently, the singer criticized Paul Ryan after so many children had been split up from their families. He said, how can you possibly post the Father's Day post that Paul Ryan ended up sending out? It was just a message about how it was the greatest thing of his life and that sort of thing. So you have the two of them, but then you have also people turning to Twitter. Oprah said, babies torn from their parents, I can't stand it. You have someone like a Mindy Kaling. She ended up saying, let's please help. By the way, the beginning of this, actually, it just got cut off, but she said, if it's true that the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, let's please help it bend a little faster for the sake of these vulnerable children. Republican senators, please do the right thing. We are begging. Another one to share with you is give you a little bit of some images of various actors and musicians and people who have also been lending a voice to the cause. And when I say cause, I mean against Trump. So that's Willie Nelson, people like Ellen DeGeneres, as well as performer Common, and then Reese Witherspoon have all voiced their opinions on this topic. So what I've talked about earlier, Andrew, what about those people that work for Fox? People like Seth MacFarlane, for example, Family Guy creator. He ended up saying that I'm embarrassed. The fact that I work for Fox is not a good thing in my books. So that was something. And then we saw other people getting on board, such as director Paul Feig. He also said similar sentiments. And then Steve Levitan. This is a person who is responsible for Modern Family. This is a very a comedic show that's supposed to be edgy and, like I say, Modern Family. And he says, I'm disgusted to work at a company that has anything to do with at Fox News, because Modern Family airs on Fox. This, and he had an expletive, is the opposite of what Modern Family stands for. Now, I have to tell you, Andrew, that shortly after making that post, Steve Levitan made it public that he would be breaking ties with Fox altogether. He says, at the end of the run of Modern Family, I'm out.
Interesting. All right. Thanks, Yelena.
We'll see you soon.
There is political pressure on the White House over this issue, and also pressure of a different sort, pressure on those who provide spiritual counsel for the president. Pastor Sam Rodriguez is the founder of the New Season Christian Worship Center. He led a prayer at Donald Trump's inauguration 18 months ago, and the pastor joins me now from Sacramento. So thank you, Sam Rodriguez, for taking the time. So what is your position on the White House policy of family separation?
Separating families can best be described as morally reprehensible, anti-Christian, and anti-American. There is no redemptive thread whatsoever in this policy.
And that is interesting because, you know, you've been supportive of President Trump, and yet you are, I mean, your words are strong here. Why do you feel so strongly that this is wrong?
Oh, it's completely wrong. It's anti-biblical. We can't serve as advocates for a pro-family platform and simultaneously advocate for separating families. There is cognitive dissonance taking place. There is a lack of a moral continuum. for lack of a better phrase. It's wrong. I mean, if you hear the outcries, if you hear these little kids crying out for their parents, for mommy and papi, there's no way you can even embrace it in any way, form, or shape. Look, I support the president as it pertains to making sure we protect our borders and ending illegal immigration, even on humanitarian grounds. I'm privy to coyotes, sex trafficking, what takes place at the border. I pastor a church of immigrants, by the way, so I'm privy firsthand to this entire story, this entire journey for years now in America. So I agree with the president. We have to stop illegal immigration. I disagree with this zero policy. It's not that Trump signed a piece of legislation. This is the 1997 Clinton-Flores Resettlement Compromise, the 2008 Wilberforce Act of George W. Bush, and a 2016 ruling from the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the 9th District. But he is enforcing something that stood in the books with zero grace. What we need right now, and by the way, the president did say on Friday that he believes separating families is wrong. The First Lady said she believes it's wrong. I need Congress to act immediately this week on finding a solution to this horrific and tragic policy.
So have you had a chance to speak to the president about this, or about immigration generally? And if you did, what did you tell him? Yeah.
Not on this. I've spoken to the president on immigration issues, absolutely. On this particular policy, not recently, but I have had contacts, of course, with officials from the White House on this matter, and not only myself. This is pretty important. Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, the most arguably the quintessential leader of the conservative evangelical movement, the most conservative side of the evangelical movement. Franklin Graham called this policy horrific and unacceptable. So it's across the board. Evangelicals who represent a significant portion of the president's support base, necessary for midterm elections and critical for 2 years from now, there's great angst and consternation in our community regarding this policy. We commend them on religious liberty, we commend them on life, but we have great issues with a policy that separates families.
Why is he not listening to you and people like you?
Well, the president is saying that the onus falls on Congress explicitly. He stated the onus falls on Congress. Look, again, we had our troops on the ground, literally my government public affairs liaisons on the ground in D.C. Paul Ryan has a piece of legislation. There are pieces of legislation on the House side. It looks like there's hiccups on the Senate side, and it's both Democrats and Republicans.
But it's not. I mean, the president can stop this. It doesn't require Congress. He doesn't have to. He did not have to implement this policy. He did not. He can choose not to separate children from their parents. He can make that choice. He doesn't even need Congress.
No, president could execute some sort of executive order right now, and it would be great if he would do that. The problem is this, in his opinion, and I've heard him state this explicitly, the problem is if he executes an executive order, again, he's implementing something that preceded him, but if he executes executive order, nothing happens as it pertains to border security. And this continues to become a havoc. We have thousands of people coming to the border. Some of these kids come with people that are not even their parents, by the way, and they're not even related to them, just adults. And there are those that are exploiting the system for the purpose of trying to come in. And then there are those that are legitimately trying to come in, seeking viable asylum. So it's all conflated right now. And he believes the answer is a congressional solution that will legalize the dreamers, build the wall, and end the separation of families. We need Congress to act immediately. I would like him to act. I don't think he will. I don't think the president will sign an executive order. That's why I'm calling upon Congress, the only group right now that can provide a solution to stop the separation of families immediately.
Pastor, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That is Pastor Sam Rodriguez in Sacramento, California. Many people are saying that the family separation policy is not America. CBC opinion columnist Neil MacDonald argues on our website, oh yes, it is. You can read that at cbcnews.ca. Much more ahead. Stay with us.